Well, hi everyone. I'm recording this video on Monday, November 17th, 2025. I just got back from Rhode Island. Earlier this morning, I posted my video about my summary of the hearing that was held on November 14th, the joint House Senate committee hearing with RiDOT Director Peter Alviti. And I thought I was good making Washington Bridge videos for a while. And then some absolutely bombshell information landed in my lap that I felt really needed to be presented to everyone in Rhode Island because I can't even believe it myself. My source that provided me this information has access to it from one of the defendants in this lawsuit that the state has launched against 13 defendants, contractors, consultants who are associated with the Washington Bridge for the last 10 years. You all know what I think about most of the aspects of that lawsuit. My source also tells me that he provided this same information to other investigative journalists in the area there in Rhode Island, but he wasn't confident that they were going to do anything with this information for whatever reason. So I'm going to go through it here very briefly and let you know what I think the implications are here. So what we're talking about is going back to early 2019, RiDOT was looking to replace the entire superstructure for the Westbound Washington Bridge. You heard that right. The bridge that they later decided to rehabilitate and then decided, oh no, now we discovered this broken anchor rod and we got to close the bridge and now we got to tear it down and so on. They had a plan lined out to replace the superstructure, basically everything you see above the water for this westbound bridge in 2019. Let's take, for example, this email here from AECOM. He's sending it to Anthony Pompey and Ryan Salbas with RiDOT. Anthony and Ryan, as requested attached, please find a memorandum regarding the reuse of the existing substructure under a potential superstructure replacement and widening contract. The memorandum has two parts, one from AECOM and one from Steer Engineering for our respective portions of the bridge. So they divided the scope of this investigation between AECOM and Steer Engineering. Let's first look at the AECOM memo. It is dated January 18th, 2019, and it's addressed to Anthony Pompey, who is the project manager still for the Westbound Washington Bridge, not only for the demolition contract, but for the design, build, replacement project. Mr. Pompey, at the request of RiDOT, we have looked into the evaluations of the existing substructure units of the Washington Bridge North number 700 that were performed for the current rehabilitation contract and have come up with the following summary of findings in the hopes that this helps with the decision to potentially reuse these substructure units under a potential superstructure replacement scenario. So AECOM looked at the western half of the bridge from the west abutment through Pier 13, and then Steer Engineering looked at Piers 14 through 17 and the east abutment. So let's look at some of the things that they took exception to for their study. They did not perform an evaluation of the existing pile-supported foundations, as it was not in the scope of work for the rehabilitation project. And then they talk about the design methodology. If you look at item 5, under the current contract, the substructures and the superstructure were being rehabilitated to provide for an additional 25-year lifespan, whereas a new superstructure would likely be designed for at least a 75-year lifespan. And in their analysis findings, for the west abutment through Pier 13, the results of the analysis showed that none of the columns required any strengthening, as they all have design ratios greater than 1.0. So they're talking about the pier columns. In conclusion, based on the analysis that were performed for the rehabilitation contract, coupled with the repair/rehab work that has been done to the substructure to date, we find it feasible that the existing substructure units could be reutilized under a superstructure replacement scenario, bearing in mind the limitations previously mentioned and noting that some modifications and/or strengthening of the substructure units may be necessary once new analyses have been completed. Now let's look at the Steer Engineering memo. Dear Mr. Fish, they're referring to Mr. Dave Fish, PE, who is at the time acting chief engineer for RiDOT. The rehabilitation of the Washington Bridge North Bridge 700 project included the rehabilitation and strengthening of the super and substructures of the existing bridge to extend the service life of the bridge and raise its load rating. In order to increase traffic capacities, there have been discussions on replacing the superstructure while utilizing the existing substructure. Steer Engineering was responsible for the design of the eastern approach of the bridge from Pier 14 14 through the east abutment, including both the super and substructure. This memorandum concerns only that portion of the bridge. They go on to say the rehabilitation of the existing eastern substructures was necessary due to the poor condition of the reinforced concrete piers, poor concrete materials, and changes in design code since its construction. The work done thus far on the substructures has served to reduce these deficiencies, but some deficiencies will remain and will affect the ability of these substructures to support a new superstructure for a reasonable design life. And we're going to page 2, and I talk about the difference between the original and the current design loading. And at the bottom of page 2, talk about poor condition. Prior to the concrete rehabilitation, the reinforced concrete pier caps 14 through 17 were rated as being in overall fair to poor condition. Repairs were made in early 2017 to the concrete caps, including concrete spalls with exposed and corroded rebar, areas of rust staining, efflorescence, and matte cracking. In mid-2018, prior to the chloride extraction, repairs were again required, which amounted to approximately an additional 10% of the surface area of the caps. It is expected that the continued deterioration will be reduced now that the chloride extraction has occurred, though no results have been provided as of the writing of this memo. However, the caps will still be exposed to water and salt through unrepaired bridge deck joints. And this next paragraph, poor materials. The next paragraph, poor materials, basically indicates that the pier caps 14, 16, and 17 had lower strengths, considerably lower strengths than what was specified originally for the construction of 3,000 psi. And then the last page, this conclusion, it may be feasible to reuse the existing eastern approach substructures to support a new superstructure. However, further structural analysis will need to be completed to determine the new loading on the existing substructure, including seismic, and there are several serviceability considerations that need to be considered. Piers and abutments would need to be modified in order to have a wider superstructure. These substructures are well into their design life with relatively weak concrete whose service life has been extended slightly by using chloride extraction, but the predicted remaining service life is still just 25 years. There are currently deck joints that are either leaking or open, allowing water and chlorides to drain into the pier caps that will accelerate deterioration. The design service of a new superstructure would far exceed that of the existing substructure. Service life of the substructures may be able to be extended if a lighter superstructure is utilized. So again, we see a mention here of poor maintenance and repair of this bridge deck for years that led to deterioration of several aspects of the bridge. The pier caps, and later we found the corrosion of the post-tension anchors. So I'm going to circle back with all the questions these studies and these memos raise in my mind. But again, to show that RiDOT was apparently serious about looking at replacement of the superstructure as well as rehabilitation of the substructure for the Westbound Bridge that was later closed and demolished. This is April 23rd, 2019, from a Lori Fassett. I understand she serves as a project manager at RiDOT, and she's sending an email to Anthony Pompey, who we mentioned previously, and they're talking about the anticipated cost. And she says, we based it on the bid price of the Washington Bridge South Replacement Project from 2003 that was $40 million, which had more significant substructure work. With inflation, we estimate about $50 million for the superstructure replacement and another $10 to $15 million for the ramp highway work, which gave us a $65 million. So why did they look in 2019 to replace the entire superstructure of the Westbound Bridge and rehabilitate the substructure? And instead of doing that for $65 million, decided, oh, we're going to do essentially partial repairs, not replace the bridge deck, apparently not do anything to the substructure, and it's going to cost $78 million. That was a contract awarded in 2020 to Aetna Barletta. And they get halfway through that contract when they discover the broken anchor rod, and the rest is history, as they say. So again, to show how apparently they were serious back in 2019 about replacing this Westbound Bridge, they did an extensive traffic study. But there's so many things about the Westbound Bridge, I'd say in the period of 2019 to 2023 that just doesn't add up. One of the things, and this was brought up at the hearing when Attorney Cunha posed these questions to RiDOT Director Peter Alviti, but they referenced the West Jenny forensic evaluation report and noted that the substructure condition rating from the bridge inspections for the Westbound Bridge was a 4 all the way from 2013, and then suddenly changes, goes from a 4 to 6 in 2020. And again, it's not clear what, if any, work was actually done to the substructure to change that rating. Director Alviti at the hearing referenced that there was work done, but didn't provide any specific information. I suspect that it wouldn't be be possible to reuse the existing foundation and just put a new superstructure on it as they were planning back in 2019 if the condition rating was only a 4 for the substructure. And it looks to me to be some minor miracle that suddenly the condition rating went to 6. But again, there's so many things about this project that don't make sense to me. Now, at the end, I'm going to go through a list of questions that I have about what all this may mean. But I think it's extraordinary that RiDOT clearly was looking at replacing the westbound bridge clear back in 2019, and instead they embark on a series of contracts that weren't completed for a variety of reasons, and they didn't resemble, in terms of scope, anything approaching a more ambitious superstructure replacement project. Before I get into those items that occurred to me here, I want to mention I had that video post this morning, and a lot of you have commented about the rather appalling performance of RiDOT Director Peter Alviti in terms of not being able to recall key information, not being knowledgeable about key aspects of his administration of the DOT. And another possibility occurred to me, and that is sort of like if you're a Kung Fu fan, there's an old 1978 Jackie Chan movie called Drunken Master. It's a form of Kung Fu where Jackie Chan either was or pretended to be intoxicated to throw his opponent off balance. His opponent had difficulty engaging him when he was fighting in this unconventional drunken style. And the thought that occurred to me is that perhaps Director Alviti is completely willing to play the fool, as it were, by saying he doesn't know things that he should know instead of actually revealing the truth. So let's go through some of these key questions. Again, why was the superstructure replacement plan not pursued when it was identified in 2019? What was the basis for determining that the superstructure needed to be replaced, since apparently no non-destructive testing to determine the condition of the post-tension cables was performed since 1992, and apparently the existence of broken anchor rods were not known until December 2023. Also, the poor condition of the post-tension cables was supposedly not known until February 2024 after VN performed their post-closure study. Again, what if anything was done to raise the condition of the substructure from a 4 in 2013 to 2019 to a 6 in 2020? Why did RiDOT pursue a $78 million rehab project with Aetna Barletta in 2020 that apparently did not include superstructure replacement or work to improve the substructure condition? Remember, they were approximately halfway into this project when the bridge was shut down in December 2023 due to the discovery of the broken anchor rods. Another point, how was it that the broken anchor rods were reportedly undetected until the young engineer came along in December 2023 who accessed these anchor rod locations using catwalks that were left by Carty Corporation clear back in 2018? And lastly, why was RiDOT planning to reuse the existing pile foundations for the Westbound Washington Bridge without any apparent condition assessment of these foundations in 2019, but chose to not reuse these same foundations following the 2023 closure? Yet again, apparently no condition assessment of the pile foundations had been performed. So I really hope that local investigative reporters will dive into these issues. There's plenty of things to peel back there. Perhaps these questions can be addressed at a future oversight hearing with the House, Senate, and the DOT. I hear that there may be future hearings. I don't know. So with that, I want to send a shout out to those of you who've contributed to buy me a coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to send a shout out to the channel members, and certainly a thank you to those of you who provided super thanks. Stay tuned, everyone.